All right, guys. First of all, thank you, all the doctors and Jean for all the work you guys done and you guys continue to do. My name is Felipe Martins. I'm from Brazil. Um, I left my house when I was very young. At 10 years old, I left my house. I left my mom, my family, to follow my dream, to follow what I always dreamed of. At the age of 15, I moved to Italy, and as you guys can see, I'm older now and I am being professional for 16 years. And last year I had a very tough moment with my injury. I had the ACL, I had a surgery in my knee, and it was a very long 7 months of work, but I'm finally back. And I just want to start talking that the all this conversation is so important for everyone to see and understand what is a lot of in professional sport is hiding behind a person, behind a professional athlete, and those issues, mental health, it's for everyone. And I think it's a problem that many one don't want to talk about, especially in professional sports, because you can look like weak or you can feel like weak, and people is still judging if you talk about that, especially in professional sports. So I think now is the time that we do something to help our community, to help others to understand a little bit. And it's a pleasure to have everyone in this call. And let's talk about this very important issue. I think let's start. What do you guys think still a stigma around mental health? What is still complicated to talk about, especially in our communities and with people that still, kind of shy to talk about it, and always seems like a problem to talk about mental health?
I'll give a shot at it first. I think number one, it's stigmatized because historically it started out being stigmatized, and we haven't broken that stigma from the disease itself. I am a nurse with an advanced degree, so I kind of think in the mental model method. And what came to me, and I'm gonna try to make this short, it came to me, we can discuss every other part of the body, the heart, the lungs, any physical injury, somebody breaks a leg, we can speak about that openly. But when we get to the neck up, we have a difficulty speaking about that important part of the body, the brain, which allows us to think, feel, act, and behavior. And I think historically, and I've said this openly even in other meetings, sometimes the profession itself aided in that process, because years ago, doctors would tell people, don't tell anybody you have a mental illness. That was a known factor. And now we are flipping the script. We're saying, tell, talk, it's okay, and to be open. But psychiatrists even used to say, don't tell anybody about this. That hasn't been that many years ago. It's been in my lifetime, and we're switching this. So I think now we're flipping the switch, and we're being honest, because this is an illness like any other. And we need to address it as such and treat it and talk about it as such.
I think especially for children's, we start very early. And I believe, I have two children, and I always very careful to try to understand, their mentality and what they're going through, learning process. And I think a doctor can speak a little bit more about those talking points.
As a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I have realized that what parents say and how they stigmatize or talk about psychiatry, feeling, emotions, mental illness really affects how a kid, an adolescent, would perceive the illness as well. There's often shame associated with mental illness, again, as a result of what society brings about it, what society says about it.
Dr. Richard, what do you think that is so unique that mental health affect anyone? What is so unique in mental health that it's special? It's treated like you're a special person when you talk about mental health.
So let me respond a couple of different ways. First of all, I personally have lived for a long time with chronic low-grade depression. Think about the stigma in the sense that, as Jean was talking about, it's easy to talk about elbows and knees and kidneys and hearts and so forth. And frankly, when I was struggling with recognizing first that I was depressed, and secondly, whether or not I wanted to try to see if an antidepressant would benefit me. And, after the fact, I realized I knew every illness in my family, but it was years after I started on an antidepressant that I learned sort of accidentally from an uncle that said, "Oh, of course, you know about grandma, right?" And I did not know about my grandmother, but she had been treated multiple times in the hospital for severe depression with electroconvulsive therapy and so forth. And I never knew it. And I was mad that nobody ever talked to me about it. But I also, even as a psychologist, I didn't ask about it. I didn't say, "Hey, look, I think I might be depressed. Has anybody in the family ever been depressed and benefited from treatment, and what helped?" I think sunshine and science are the best sort of remedies or antidotes for this. And so, again, congratulate the DC United organization for hosting this. I think every time somebody owns their own story, it liberates somebody else. So talking about it, bringing it out of the shadows, I think is one thing. The other thing in terms of science, if you look at a brain scan of somebody who's been diagnosed with depression and somebody who isn't, or somebody who's been diagnosed with PTSD or not, or an addicted brain, they're so dramatically different. And it's really very hard to look at pictures like that and not be persuaded that this is, there's not behavioral health care and real health care. Behavioral health care is core to all of health care. Mm-hmm. These are brain-based disorders. And as you're saying, the prevalence is at least 1 in 4 American adults will be diagnosed with a behavioral health condition. And yet we don't talk about it. It's 1 in 4 mental illness. Breast cancer, everybody knows the pink ribbon. It's 1 in 8 women. 1 in 4 adults will be diagnosed with a major mental illness. And yet nobody knows that May is Mental Health Month. Nobody knows that green is the symbol and the ribbon for mental health.
I'd like to, could I go after?
Of course,
and I was going to piggyback on what Richard said, is because number one, that is how NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, came into being 40 years ago. Because early on, we recognized it was a biological brain disorders and not mom's fault, or not because there was bad parenting and all of the other things that had been said prior to that. That was revolutionary because number one, it also allowed it to be included in health insurance. I've lived long enough to know that when it wasn't, it was not included in health insurance as it is today, not where it needs to be according to what it needs for parity, but before people had to pay out of pocket. So we're talking about 41 years ago that NAMI came out revolutionary in saying it is a biological brain disorder, therefore you must pay for it, you must treat it, and you must do that. And we're still fighting that battle now, getting it recognized in the medical or treatment community, but now we need to get it down into the society, the people who don't understand or haven't opened their minds to that it is anybody's illness.
I think that's my next talking point. I believe, a lot of people can't understand people that suffer from those depression. I think, and what is the challenge that we face, and what is a way we could show the society or make them understand what is going on with people that have mental problems or mental health issues. And I believe it starts with children's, right? What are we doing, or what are we preventing or teaching them, how to deal with those issues?
Unfortunately, the majority of the teaching comes from our only resource. Our front line is our pediatrician. We would hope that the school counselors teach about it, the school personnel teach about it, but the first person that really gets the first touch of interaction with, does this person struggle with mental illness or not? Are they struggling emotionally? It is the pediatrician. And from there, the pediatrician is responsible for providing avenues for discussing the illness, the treatment. And so their roles are the most important, following, of course, the role of the parents.
And what is, especially, that's my curiosity, is are those kids prepared to tell their father they are having those type of problems? What is the way they can come to their parents to say they might having some issues with those? It's a very important question, I think, because I don't think in these, especially now, kids are so interactive with everyone, with smartphones and everything, that we might have much more mental health issues with those type of kids, now than before. And are they getting ready to tell the parents or confront those type of issues?
Mental health awareness has really come into the spotlight, and that is thanks to NAMI, thanks to people who bring it to our attention. The social media has had a huge impact on what mental illness is and how it could be approached. For some, mental health still is stigmatizing, but others, when our children and adolescents, hopefully, not children, when they're on social media and they're reading through other people's thoughts and they're noticing, hey, I struggle with this too, then it's the next step. Who do they feel safe in speaking about this? We hope it is the parents, or that parents have some sense of it. We encourage the parents to, if they're recognizing, to speak to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician can then say, let's talk about this alone. Can I speak to your child alone? Or if the pediatrician has some insight, or the parent calls them in advance, sends them an email in advance, the pediatrician will use an opportunity to pull the kiddo aside and say, let me just speak to Joey by himself for a minute. And Joey, you look down, you don't look like your old self that I remember you from months before. How's your life? How are things going with you? How is school? How's your social outlet? What are you doing for coping? With any of these questions, Joey may answer. Either Joey will answer in a bright, cheerful manner, or Joey will answer with his head down and say, not so much. I haven't been doing much. Everything is sad. Everything is not good anymore. I don't really care for anything anymore. And again, we're putting a lot of pressure on the parents and the pediatricians, primary care providers, but they really are the first steps to following when the kiddo expresses or displays.
Oh, I like to piggyback on that. I think even earlier than the pediatrician, or even before they get to the medical model, what we at NAMI are educating and pushing for is children helping children. And that is one of the biggest things. I mean, we've gone into schools saying and helping the children, a program especially where they teach each other and they see that they are athletes and there are other people. And if you see something different in a friend, ask them have they told their parents. So when they get to the pediatrician, it's pretty serious maybe. But before they even get to that point, is to help them recognize that there's something going on. One of the things that I've experienced most recently is that a lot of schools are calling people in to speak and whatever, and especially when the suicide was going on. And what I found that children were making jokes about this. They didn't understand the seriousness of it. Or they would call somebody, oh, you bipolar. And I'm saying, do you know what that word means? So it's even before they get to a professional, is where we need to start in line what I call soft groundwork to get them comfortable, or at least telling them, talk to your parent or somebody you can trust, or your teacher, because they hear the words. Television, they know the words, they know what it, but it's a joke. It doesn't happen to me, and we have to put some reality to that perspective. And that's what I say when I go into the schools, or when I talk to even my grandchildren. Oh, you're bipolar, stop acting like that. You know what that word means. We don't use that word in this content. So each moment, it's not a special occasion. For me, it's every occasion you have the opportunity in a gentle way to say these things.
I'd like to add a couple of things. One is about, I think, one source of hope is the further integration of behavioral healthcare into the rest of healthcare. So with pediatricians being better equipped to do screening and have real-time technical assistance or doctor-to-doctor consultation. Similarly with primary care docs, routinely incorporating screening tools on depression and anxiety. It's just part of an annual physical health checkup, that there's hope in sort of normalizing it there, as well as the mainstream institutions, like you mentioned already, about schools. I think we are increasingly, as the Department of Behavioral Health, enlisting faith-based partners, and trying to just generally elevate the level of literacy across the board about mental health and addiction, substance use disorders. I also wanted to just comment briefly about media, which is really a double-edged sword. I mean, I think, quite frankly, that media, irresponsible media and film and so forth, sometimes serves to perpetuate and exaggerate the perception that people with mental illness are dangerous. People with serious mental illness are much, much, much more likely to be the victims of violent crime than to be perpetrators of violent crime. And social media, I think, can be leveraged to improve literacy and so forth, although there's certainly the caveat in terms of bullying and how rapidly negative messaging and so forth really gets amplified. But I think, again, just as I said earlier, sort of shining a brighter light on this, I think that there's a lot of hope in that.
So I think now I'm gonna do a promise, and obviously is a question at the same time. It's what can we do as a community, especially myself, can do for the community, for all these organizations and hospitals, that we can help to get out there, you know, and talk about it. What as humans and as members of the community we can do, especially in this community, to get out there and explain and talk about it to help everyone that is needed up there.
I'd like to respond. Is be you, speak up, bring it into the spotlight. We as doctors, as NAMI representatives, psychologists, school personnel, we try, but sometimes it requires that role model, that idol, to bring it into light. We have two examples recently. The mayor of Maryland, governor of Maryland brought it into the spotlight after he lost his son to suicide. During the Super Bowl, it was a discussion and awareness to mental health needs. So bringing it into the light, normalizing it, that other people do struggle with this and we need to be aware and act on it when we are.
Yeah, I like that when we say normalize it, and it needs to be in every conversation, more in the schools, the churches, the community, your neighborhood. The more you normalize it, and less frightening and embarrassment will be diminished.
I was reading something last week. It was talking about sort of our culture's attraction to what they referred to as toxic positivity. sort of the sense that we, somebody says, hey, how are you? Hey, terrific. I'm blessed or whatever, as opposed to saying, you know what? I'm not great. And during COVID, I noticed this. It's sort of, when was the last time I heard somebody say, honestly, I'm terrific? Now, that's, just sort of a throwaway line. How are you? Often we don't really want to know. But I think listening to each other and asking that, and making more room for things don't have to be happy, and there's a falseness about that I think every day in every conversation we have an opportunity to overcome that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. When my son comes from school, sometimes I see he's kind of sad. I said, what happened? Nothing. And I said, hey, today at training, I didn't play well. I didn't train well, and I felt very sad. And then he feels the time he can open, he can say that something bad maybe happened to him. And I think that's the important is how you approach, how you talk about things.
You see, you normalized it again.
Yes. How you ask the question and how you act as if it was a normal response, and not how do you feel. You asked me that. I don't know how I feel. 1,000 things happen up until 4 o'clock today.
And I think you're still kind of in that same problem with the quarantine and the COVID and everything we've been through, this challenge to 2020. What do you guys learn from that, especially for the mental health? What was the lessons that you guys learned throughout this process that we still going to, we are not out yet?
No, we are not. As far as mental health for children, the cases are getting more severe by the day as a result of the impact of COVID. Children, they have much more of a limited coping skill, knowledge of what they can do, as opposed to adults that have some age on them and have learned how to protect themselves, how to help themselves feel better. Children, once you deplete their social network, you deplete their coping skills, their social outlets, their sports, those kind of things, if they go out, the adolescent starts to suffer and struggle. During this pandemic at Children's, we have noticed a significant uptick in the number of suicide attempts that we are receiving. They're much more severe than they used to be. In addition, we have found that when we get someone with a manic episode of bipolar where they're severely decompensated, they are much more severe symptoms. Schizophrenia, same thing. People are staying home. They don't have their social outlets. They don't have that exposure to sunlight. And mental illness shows itself in one way or another. They fear getting treatment. As a result of the fear of getting treatment from just coming out of the house with the quarantine, their illness is progressing, is getting worse. And thus we're seeing significantly more decompensated cases than we used to prior to COVID.
Well, I wanted to say, as for NAMI, we have a helpline that we have received many more calls on that helpline since COVID. But many times, and I think a lot of it is how we, whether we call ourselves professional or whether we in this business of helping people with mental illness, is how we respond. I've noticed when I take the calls, if one of the questions I ask, how can I help you? And it's amazing how people will open up and tell you what you need instead of asking, well, how do you feel? What's wrong with you? It's a different kind of response in how you would relate to an individual and not come across as this is a very severe illness and we've got to fix you, because we can't fix that. We've got to be available to them. So I think a lot has to do with the professional, or whatever your role is working with a person with mental illness, is to know how and what way to assist them. And with the information, I've been in meetings and somebody says something, everybody says, oh my God, if they hear the word suicide, well, what does that make you feel like? So we've also got to learn how we respond to information as well as what we give out.
In children, we state, how can I support you through
That's
this?
right. How can I support you? Or I'm listening to you. That's all you need to say. You don't try to fix it all at once, because they're smart enough to know you can't. And so that's why they don't withhold. I see Rich.
Felipe, in terms of lessons learned or sort of shifting consciousness because of COVID, I think there are a couple of things. One is it is important for us to acknowledge that this was a collective trauma.
Yes.
And collective grief. I mean, there's grief in terms of obviously the people who were lost, but there were many, many other kinds of losses that were experienced as a result of COVID. And while I think as a culture, we're not particularly good at dealing with grief, the mechanisms we have for that were thwarted, right? We couldn't gather, we couldn't break bread with each other, we couldn't share them in a communal way. I heard somebody recently talking about that we should be expecting something like a 3-year shadow in terms of the mental health impacts of this. On the other hand, I also think the fact that this has been a collective experience, I do think that there is more permission for people to talk about the trauma, the isolation, and the loss. I want to also go back for just a second to your point about professional athletes and the sense of weakness. I think we have to be intentional about. I loved hearing you talk about talking with your son, teaching a different kind of masculinity where strength includes being willing to talk about difficult things, and real men take care of themselves. Not so much that real men don't show weakness. That I think moving toward a different kind of masculinity is also part of moving out of gradually the stigma that still attaches to mental illness.
Yes, it was important, especially for my kids, to learn about that during my process of rehab. Was moments that I really cried in front of them, and they would ask me, "Oh, what's wrong?" I would just tell them that I was in pain, or I was sad because I couldn't be playing and do what I really wanted to do. And they've learned a little bit with me that those things, it's normal. Even if I'm their father and growing up, I cry. It's normal to cry and be in tough moments, but that's only gonna make you strong. And I try to show them that it's just a moment. Everything passes, and then when you get through, you are tougher than you were in that moment. So yes, I think it's very important for us to be talking about this, because everyone can go through tough moments in their life, but it's how you react from that and what you become after that storm or that difficult moments that make you. I think that's actually build you. Everyone should go to tough moments because you become stronger. I think the moments that you are in vulnerable position and you are having struggles in your life is the moments that you can see things that you cannot see when you're so happy, because you're so focused on being so happy that you forget the little things that make a huge difference in lives. And I think that's that everyone needs to pay more attention to mental awareness, mental health.
I think that point is well taken, that even during this pandemic, we grew in many ways in comparison to what you just said, because we had no control and therefore outside control. So we had to learn how to do some self-control and to be able to manage that and think and love and congregate in different ways. I didn't know a thing about a Zoom until this all happened. And now we're all on it all day long. And so, but that was a growing process. And I think if we do that with mental health and mental illness, we will see outcomes and throw some research in there as well to put the dollars there to do the research that's needed to help facilitate the ideas and the things that people would like to do in this arena.
Thank you so much, guys. It was really great to be talking to you guys and send these informations out there for everyone that's needed. And I hopefully one day I can have you guys at the field, and it will be a pleasure to have you guys there. And if you guys need any thing from me, I'm open. I always love to visit hospitals and work with children and help in any way we can.
Okay.
Be careful, Felipe. We might invite you on.
But take you up on those offers.
I sure will. Here at Children's, we have lots of admirers of soccer.